Okay, Pilot Mike, and I'm in Nevada, just about to go up on a helicopter tour over the Grand Canyon. So we're going to get some incredible footage today. It's a 70-minute flight. We're going to go over the Hoover Dam. So stay tuned. We'll be up in the air soon. Pilot Mike.
Hello, what a fantastic day this was. I'm going to narrate parts of this video so you know exactly what you're looking at within the video, and I'll tell you exactly what kind of things you will expect to see if you go on one of these helicopter tours. I'm going to talk about the airfields that we fly over, a bit about the Hoover Dam, some general information about aviation and the safety of helicopters, and there's also a little story about a mid-air collision that happened a long time ago, which was a really famous mid-air collision which completely changed the safety of flying in the United States. So we're just taking off at the moment from an airfield called Boulder City. If you want to check that out on the simulator, that's Kilo Bravo Victor uniform. We're flying in a G-Star helicopter, also known as a Eurocopter AS350. I asked the pilot, who's also called Mike, another pilot Mike, why the company choose these helicopters, and his response was because it has really good power to weight ratio, it's a 700 brake horsepower helicopter, has 6 seats and lots of windows, which is exactly what you need if you're taking people on tours over the Grand Canyon, of course. As I mentioned, this video will have periods of notation and periods without. So if you want to jump to the interesting facts, just go to 5:24 for the Pierce Ferry carrier landing information, 6 minutes 55 in for the flying in the Grand Canyon and the safety of helicopters and flying through the Grand Canyon, 9 minutes 44 in for the famous mid-air collision story, 12 minutes 26 in for the Grand Canyon West Native American Reserve, and 13:28 to continue with the mid-air collision story. And coming up is the Hoover Dam. Just flying over the Hoover Dam now. The Hoover Dam was originally known as Boulder Dam when it was created in 1933. Then it was officially renamed the Hoover Dam for President Herbert Hoover as a joint resolution of Congress in 1947. It holds back the Lake Mead and is the largest reservoir in the United States by volume when it's full. Of course, the Grand Canyon was created by the Colorado River, which is an absolutely enormous river at 2,334 kilometers in length, and it took 17 million years for it to erode the Grand Canyon out of the landscape. This flight over the Grand Canyon will be in 3 parts, the first one being this one, the other one will be a 360 VR experience with the 360 camera, and finally I'm actually going to simulate it on X-Plane so I can show you the exact flight plan that we take and so that you can simulate it yourself. This is a really interesting landmark which we're flying over at the moment. It's L25 Pierce Ferry, which our pilot informed me was used by the US military to practice carrier landings. So if you want to practice your carrier landings on your simulator, just load up L25. Dropping down into the canyon now, this is the most exciting part of the flight where you actually get to go inside of the canyon. I did ask the pilot what the avoidance protocol is in flying in the Grand Canyon, and it's basically all visual flight rules, but the helicopters are on a designated flight path and they keep in contact with each other so they know where each other is at all times. The pilots of course do this trip about 4 times a day, every day, so they're really experienced in flying these helicopters and flying this flight plan. Just as I'm mentioning that, I'll tell you some statistics and information about the safety of flying, because some people do get a little bit concerned about the safety of flying in helicopters over the Grand Canyon. As with anything in life, there is a little bit of risk, and certainly there's always risk with flying. However, these pilots, because they do this trip every single day, multiple times a day, and the aircraft are really well maintained, it's very rare that any problems should ever happen. In fact, in an estimated 800,000 people who fly over the Grand Canyon in helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft every year, very few accidents ever happen. In the past 15 years, there's only ever been 50 people who have died from crashes. So 50 deaths over the 12 million travellers in the past 15 years results at a fatality rate of a tiny 0.000416%. The chances of anything happening to you are extremely slim. The ride wasn't bumpy at all. I was a little bit concerned about the incredible heat that you have in the Nevada desert in July. It was about 46 degrees centigrade, but this didn't mean that the flight was rocky at all. There was no turbulence, it was very smooth, and nobody on board got airsick. There's a really interesting aviation story that you should check out if you're interested in such things. There was a famous mid-air collision that happened over the Grand Canyon, which completely rocked the aviation industry at the time and forced major changes in safety in the aviation industry. What happened was, in June 30th, 1956, a United Airlines Douglas DC-7 had a mid-air collision with a Transworld Airlines Lockheed L1049 Super Constellation. Unfortunately, all 128 people on board both flights perished, and it was the first aircraft disaster in the United States that had more than 100 deaths. The collision took place in uncontrolled airspace, where it was the pilot's own responsibility to maintain separation under the see and avoid method of VFR rules. This crash highlighted the lacking state of air traffic control within the United States at the time and became a major focus of aircraft reforms. They found that there was no widespread radar. They only really used radar at the airports, and there was no long-range radar for en route flying. Another major problem was the pilots were taught to a radio operator rather than the controller. This meant that the pilot would have to radio into the radio operator, pass his message, the radio operator would then say stand by, pass that message over to the controller, and the controller would pass their message back to the operator and then back to the aircraft. Obviously this caused an awful lot of lag in the system. So what happened was both aircraft had submitted a flight plan that intersected, but they weren't supposed to be at the same altitude or at the same time. However, because of building weather and cumulus clouds, both aircraft had to fly up to 21,000 feet. Both aircraft reported that they would be over Painted Desert at 10:31 at 21,000 feet at the same time, 30 minutes before the collision. Unfortunately, because of the lag in the system and the fact that there was no radar and they were flying on their own visual flight rules, the mid-air collision happened. The only thing that at that point to stop that mid-air collision was the see and avoidance method, which relied on the pilots looking out the window and being able to see the oncoming aircraft. I'll pause there because we're coming up to some really interesting footage, but I'll carry on with this story in a little bit. Just flying past the Grand Canyon West, which is an Indian reserve for Native Americans, which I thought was really interesting. If you want to check that out on the simulator, go to Alpha Zulu 36, Alpha Zulu 35 and 1 Golf 4. Okay, I'll continue with the mid-air collision story from the 1950s. This mid-air collision, and closely followed by two more in the United States, led to a congressional hearing in 1957 to increase funding to hire and train more air traffic controllers and purchase new radar technology. This improved aviation safety immensely. Now aircraft are tracked with long-range radar en route and they can talk directly to the controller, and there's more controllers, so there's a lot less reliance on visual flight rules. Any aircraft now flying above 18,000 feet is always in controlled airspace if they're over the United States. If you want to know more about this story, I'll put a link in the description on this video, which takes you to a fantastic YouTube video that explains everything that happened and all the improvements that they've made since. Okay, coming back to land at Boulder City now. That was an absolutely incredible flight, the first time I've been up in a helicopter, and what an amazing way to experience your first ever helicopter flight by flying in the Grand Canyon. Hope you enjoyed this video. Keep an eye out for the 360 version so you can put your mobile device into your Google Cardboard and experience it in virtual reality, and have a look at the simulated version where I'll actually show you the flight path that we went over and give you some more information about how you can also simulate this flight. I've been Pilot Mike, thanks for watching.